Welcome to Live, Work, Thrive. I'm Micaela Birmingham, Scary Mommy executive producer, and I will be the moderator for tonight's panel. 2020 is here. 2020 is gone. 2021 is here. And so far, it feels like 2020, doesn't it? It's not the fresh start that we had hoped for. For many, the challenges of 2020 are ever present, and we have lost connections that used to help us cope. With that comes, for some of us, a change in the role of alcohol in our lives. Tonight, we will hear from a panel of experts specializing in women's health, at-risk drinking, and use disorders, as well as a woman who found sobriety. And with a different perspective, we will also hear from a female sommelier who is breaking barriers. There's going to be no judgments here tonight and no one-size-fits-all path to changing behavior. Specifically, our panelists will discuss pandemic stress and coping strategies, the official word on pumping and dumping, how to self-identify unhealthy patterns with alcohol, how learning about wine can moderate your consumption, and does dry January actually work? I know many of you out there want to know the answer to that one. So let's meet our panelists. We have Dr. Leena Mittal. Leena is the chief of the Division of Women's Mental Health at Brigham and Women's Hospital and an instructor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. She serves as the program director for the Women's Mental Health Fellowship at Brigham, and she's also associate medical director for the Massachusetts Child Psychiatry Access Program for Moms. And this is an innovative service for providers that see pregnant and postpartum women with mental health and substance conditions. Dr. Mittal's also board certified in psychiatry, psychosomatic medicine, and addiction medicine. And that is one badass bio. So thank you, Dr. Mittal, for being here tonight with us. Also, we have another badass woman who's a mom as well, Gabrielle Glaser, a journalist and author of the New York Times bestselling book, Her Best Kept Secret: Why Women Drink and How They Can Regain Control. She has covered the intersection of health, medicine, and culture for the New York Times and many other publications, and is the mother of 3 grown daughters. Her new book will hit shelves next week and is called American Baby: A Mother, a Child, and the Shadow History of Adoption. Thank you for being here tonight, Gabrielle.
Thank you for having me.
Later, we will hear from Christy Coulter, who is the author of the memoir in essays, Nothing Good Can Come From This, which she wrote after getting sober. Her work has also appeared in Elle, Glamour, New York Magazine, and many more. And Amy Karasavas, who is a certified sommelier with the Sommelier Society of America. Amy leads regular wine tasting classes through the New York Adventure Club. So before we get started, we have a few quick reminders for everyone watching. You can submit questions in the comments wherever you are watching, and we may feature your question later in the show. You can also email your questions to liveworkthrive@scarymommy.com. And a big announcement, tomorrow is Inauguration Day. Yes, so if there was ever a time for a toast, the day has arrived. Even more exciting, you can watch the inauguration on Scary Mommy's Twitch account. That is twitch.tv/scarymommy. Ask your children. They're all on there playing video games if you don't have the Twitch app. That'll be starting around 11 a.m. So let's get into tonight's topic. It Takes a Vineyard is the name of tonight's event. And so it's not just a catchy title. It comes from the fact that motherhood takes a literal village to get through. And right now, the pandemic has put up walls in our village. It really does feel like that at times. I had to get a puppy. Okay, that's how bad this is getting. I'm not a dog person. I now have a puppy in my house. I'm starting to like it. Not in love yet. I say we're dating. We'll get there. But Dr. Mittal, as a medical professional who specializes in pregnancy and women's mental health, what can you tell us about how the pandemic and the isolation that it brings has added to the stress of motherhood that may lead to at-risk drinking? And if you could maybe just define what you refer to as at-risk drinking would be great.
So thank you for that question. It's been so important to really validate and talk about how hard this year has been. And I see this all day, every day. I talk to women about just how hard it is to manage all of the roles they were already managing and then also add on additional roles all at the same time. So working, parenting, schooling, lather, rinse, repeat. And so, and especially doing so in these new ways, isolated ways. And so we're really seeing an impact on mental health. We have seen it in terms of access to mental health because people are seeking mental health more frequently. They are seeking mental health and then remaining in their treatment longer. So there's bottlenecks in terms of accessing treatment, and people are running out of ways to use their usual coping strategies because they're not able to see friends or do the physical activities they used to do, outdoor activities or other, the arts, culture. And so people are resorting to other strategies, and that may include drinking. And drinking can be a positive strategy at times, and other times it can lead to at-risk drinking, which would be drinking more than the recommended amount, which for women can be 7 drinks a week or 4 at a sitting. It's defined a little bit differently depending on a couple of different professional organizations, but that's about the amount that we would recommend or consider above that to be at risk.
So I think that that's such a, it's a key thing to validate. And I think so many people are going through this, and, we have intense pressures coming at us from every angle, like you mentioned, school, work, everything happening under one roof. Gabrielle, in your writing, you have looked at studies that compare mothers in Canada to the US, and there were some interesting correlations when it came to the concept of the village component. Do you think that a lack of community ties or weaker community ties can lead to at-risk drinking, especially in times like this?
Oh, absolutely. A study that came out in the early 2000s, maybe mid 2000s, examined mothers and happiness levels that the government takes surveys on satisfaction, and they call them the happiness surveys. They're not technically the happiness surveys, but that's what they measure. They measure contentment and satisfaction in one's life. And what these two economists found was that the satisfaction of women who had more education, were more high achieving, also had children, they were on that, sort of rat race that you were talking about earlier before we went on air. They were rushing their kids to sporting events. They were rushing their kids to practice. They were the ones who were asked to help pitch in at the PTA. They were the ones who were asked to stop on the way home from work. Oh, I forgot a foam board for my school project. Can you stop and get it? And that stress in the United States, the economists correlated to a high level of unhappiness. They decided to compare them to women just across the border in Canada, where there are community skating rinks. Where everybody plays hockey. Nobody's driving to hockey practice. There's a skating rink in the town, everywhere, multiple skating rinks. You know this, you're Canadian.
Don't want to brag, but
you should.
We know what time it is over there in Canada. Time to go play hockey.
Right. And there is a system, because there's a much more centralized government and a much more community-oriented approach to health that helps raise children, unlike how we raise them here, particularly those of us who are college educated and those of us who have certain aspirations for kids. There's a big correlation also. This is a separate study, but the more educated a woman is, the more likely she is to have at-risk drinking, the more likely she is to drink to excess.
There is nothing better to drive you to the bottle than driving in gridlock in New York City with 2 kids trying to put on hockey equipment in the backseat of your car. I'll just say that. So when you can walk to the rink, I mean, it's a mental health gift. So Dr. Mittal, you mentioned also some research that was early and preliminary, but maybe if you could speak to it just a little bit about the sample of 2,000 women that looked at pre and post-COVID, postpartum mental health conditions. Can you share a little bit about what this research is indicating so far? And, are things getting worse in terms of the rates of postpartum complications for women when it comes to mental health?
Yeah, so what we're seeing clinically is that COVID-19 has significantly impacted the rates of mental health conditions really across the board, but especially for women who are experiencing delivery and pregnancy, delivery, and the postpartum period during this pandemic. So, a lot of women have this sort of idea or hope or kind of imagination about how their delivery is going to go, how their postpartum period is going to go, who's going to be there to help them. And that has been disrupted so significantly early in the pandemic, women were even really fearful about whether they would be alone in the hospital or in their birth center delivering on their own. And that could be quite traumatic. Even just fearing that that could happen could be quite traumatic. And so that's really disrupted people's kind of imagination about what early parenting would look like. And so we're seeing the impacts in terms of increased clinical evidence of depression, of anxiety, and of also health-related worry and grief. So people are grieving the experience they had hoped for or imagined, and we're seeing a lot of that. I see that day to day, and we're seeing that in our study as well.
I can imagine some women might have been planning for a sister or a mother or a mother-in-law to come and live with them or visit them often during those initial, like really, days when you're bleary-eyed with a newborn. And I would guess that some folks are maybe foregoing that just out of abundance of caution with a new baby.
Yeah, I'm certainly seeing a lot of women who describe sort of these plans that have been disrupted to have somebody come stay with them or somebody who could come in and out, doulas, night nurses, or just, having their partner who may be working outside the home, not able to help in the same way because of fear of risk. And so it's been really, really disruptive. And it's really hard to take care of a baby on your own, or even just as a couple, if there's another caregiver in the home. Just two people is not enough. It really does take a village.
Yeah, no, and I can remember as a mom, the immediate kind of social circle that I met when I had a new baby was other moms with a baby the same age, just in the park, sharing, simple stories. Oh, this worked for me. Did this ever happen to you? Was incredible. Like my girls are now in middle school, and I'm still in touch with some of those same mothers that, we met when they were 5 months old. I imagine having to stop that and stop those interactions, especially in wintertime when you can't go to, the music class and you can't do all of these activities, must be really, really tough for folks. Gabrielle, you're a mom of 3, and you had an interesting anecdote that you shared with me when we spoke earlier about how when you gave birth to your 3rd child, people actually gifted you bottles of wine as though this was just as important as a car seat, but you already had enough of the gear from your other kids. Tell us about that.
Well, it was one of the comparisons that I made in my book on women's drinking. I looked at drinking rates, that at least self-reported drinking rates in the early 1990s, and they were super low. They were at an all-time low. Gallup has been asking people questions about, and again, these are self-reported polls, so you can, they're not always 100% trustworthy, but the drinking level when I had my first 2 kids in the early 1990s, early to mid 1990s, was all-time low, and things in the world were great.
Remember those days. Remember the days. Can we just take a moment and remember the days when things were great? Oh,
exactly, comparatively. And but I had my 3rd daughter in the fall of 2001 in New York, and I knew 9 people who died. There were 9 people in my small town who were killed in the towers. Anthrax was, I don't need to, re-trigger anybody, but it was a bad time. And when I brought her home from the hospital, there were bottles of wine, piled up on my porch step, and people brought me orchids with wine and more wine. And it was sort of a wink, wink, we know you might not be drinking now, but you're going to need this later. And something had shifted. There was a calculus the social calculus had shifted about what we needed to turn to relieve ourselves, to soothe ourselves, to take care of. It was sort of seen as a self-care implement, which, Dr. Mittal, I'm sure, is thinking, oh, good heavens. Wine as a baby gift. But I think it was sort of panic buying, which I think is also happening now. There's panic drinking, there's panic buying. We don't have the you mentioned earlier, we don't have the possibility of the self-care rituals that we would normally have. There's just no, I'm sorry, you can't, there's no way that Zoom yoga, as much as Adrian is fabulous, there's just no way it's the same.
That's so true. That's so true.
Shutting your kids and no, don't come in, mommy's doing yoga. My kids are grown. I can't imagine what it must be like for folks who are raising little kids.
Dr. Mittal, let's talk about that because I was reading that, there are some that believe that to an extent, responsible drinking is reinforced by having a structure in our day, going to work, taking the kids to school, going to, like Gabrielle said, doing a yoga class. When we no longer have people to see and places to go, is it easier for alcohol to take on a bigger role?
Well, I think that a lot of what is being said right now just makes so much sense. I think, one of the things that we see with drinking is that, part of it becomes a bit about shame and guilt too. So I think if people are feeling judged or unsure or feeling as though they're not able to kind of do the things that they want to be doing, all the time, that they might need to kind of reward themselves or have other ways of feeling good. And so structure helps us feel accomplished during the day. Having sort of social interactions that are separate from our work life or our home life helps us feel good. And so all those other kind of thrills and endorphin releasers are limited. And so we may be seeking other ways to feel good. And, I think that I, as a psychiatrist, see a lot of what happens when things happen to an excess. So it's not that all drinking is bad or that all drinking is even problematic. It's more about when does it not have the positive aspects or when do the burdens outweigh the positive aspects?
So I like what you said there. So not all drinking is bad. So we want to, we're not here to shame anyone who's sitting watching this lovely show with a glass of wine. That's fine. Let's talk about this transition between one activity to another, because pre-dark days of the planet, we could listen to a podcast on the way home from work or walk the kids to school to shake off the stress of a chaotic morning. Now we're freaking out at home because the Wi-Fi is down and everybody's under one roof and you're trying to do yoga, but you're in your kitchen and you're kicking your fridge and it's by no means any sort of Zen moment. So what does it mean when we use alcohol to transition from one, activity to another to give us that buffer? Is that necessarily a bad thing if we're, maybe only having one glass, to kind of make that transition feel different for us when we're not really physically transitioning? Gabrielle, what do you think?
I think as long as the drinking does not become mindful, and as long as it doesn't get out of control, as long as one glass doesn't become two, doesn't become three, doesn't become a whole bottle, then I think folks are fine. I mean, right now you just are talking about the transitions that we don't have, that we completely lack. People used to ask me in pre-COVID days, okay, well, I know I'm drinking too much. I come home, I open the refrigerator. The first thing I do is pour a big, huge glass of white wine. And the suggestion that a lot of addiction psychiatrists and drinking, people who help folks moderate, psychologists who develop moderation programs, will suggest that one smart thing to do is come home, change your clothes, take 5 minutes to yourself, pour yourself a beautiful glass of seltzer, and then if you need to, pour your glass of wine. Well, right now there are no clothes to change out of. There's no, the curtains that we have between our roles that we play are gone now. There are no curtains. We're wearing the clothes that we, there are no work clothes. I mean, I'm wearing a turtleneck today, but people hang out in their pajamas all day.
Yeah. And I mean, even the work clothes that you do wear, I mean, they're not getting changed. I mean, I've been wearing the same pants for quite a while. Don't tell, but it's not even going in the wash half the time. So, you mentioned, this idea of, pour yourself a glass of seltzer, let's say. Dr. Mittal, maybe you could talk to us about the ritualistic nature of drinking. Because we've heard from several parents who say, as soon as the kids are in bed, they open the wine. And pre-COVID, they didn't rush for that ritual. Is that something to worry about? Or could you, moderate your need for that by maybe pouring something else into a wine glass? Would that have the same effect?
I think that one of the things that is most important is that it's probably quite different for different people. And so I think, having a good sense of what is this ritual doing for you and what do you need to get out of the ritual? So is it the break? Is it the time? Is it the is it the thirst? Is, what's happening? And so, and if you can learn to become sort of to pay attention to what that ritual is doing for you, then you can think, what are the components of it that are most important? Is it taking the 5 minutes after you close the bedroom door that is most important? The pouring that's most important? Is it that you like the bubbles, or that you like the smell or the taste? Whatever those things are, kind of highlighting and optimizing those, and then also making sure that it's something that you can also that you have other strategies for achieving that same relaxation. So is this the only way you are able to relax, or are there other things that you can incorporate into your lifestyle too? There doesn't have to be all or nothing or either or.
I'm blessed to be married to a husband who has no desire to drink. And so I don't even want to open a bottle because I'm like, it's a waste. I'm not going to open this to have one glass. So I pour kombucha in my best wine glass, and it's red and it has bubbles. And I'll be honest, it's kind of nice. It like feels a little fancy. It's only kombucha, but it's good. And I don't have to open a bottle of wine and then watch the fruit flies swarm when nobody drinks it in this house. So let's talk about a graphic here that I think really paints a startling picture of the increase in drinking, comparing 2019 levels to 2020, where women were shown to have a 41% increase in heavy drinking, while men only had a 7% increase. And so this is brought to you by a Rand Corporation study in 2020. And they define heavy drinking as 5 or more drinks for women and 4 or more drinks for men. Dr. Mittal, tell us, why is heavy drinking so much more for women? I mean, this is a shocking revelation here. I'm like, wow, something's going on. How do you explain this?
I mean, I think, as you point out, 2020 has been hard. I think there are a lot of ways in which 2020 has had a disproportionate burden on women, especially around the multiple roles that we're all fulfilling. And so I think that, to my mind, what I see every day clinically is that women are sort of bearing the brunt of the multiplicity of roles, and that they're bearing the brunt of the mental health expression too. Women tend to be more explicitly able to talk about emotions and engage in kind of things to help soothe their emotions much more intentionally. And so I tend to see that women have a little bit more emotional language around what's going on for them. And, oh, I need that glass of wine. I need to also do all of the things alongside. And so it becomes more complicated, I think. And I think women tend to also have kind of that CEO role in their home, or the air traffic controller, where they're kind of doing multiple things at multiple times, perhaps disproportionately.
Gabrielle, do you think that social media that, we now have, whereas, you mentioned the lower rates of heavy drinking in the past, whereas now we have this added pressure. So even though we're all home, even though we're all, limiting our activity, there's still, you're looking at your friends. Oh, even though we're in lockdown, somebody went on a cruise. Oh, living large over there, and, looks all perfect. And, oh, look at that happy family sitting on their stoop in a pandemic, smiling. It's great. Do you think this is, adding to that pressure where, women just kind of internalize that and think that they have to keep up with the mom who's got like a little classroom set up in her home, and the other one who's, baking all the bread? I have so much yeast in my house that I bought because there was a yeast shortage. I gotta buy the yeast in case there's no more left. Do you think I've made a single loaf of anything? No, I have not. But this is the pressure. How many people have you seen on your social media with a loaf? That's bad. No more loaf posts, whoever's watching. But Gabrielle, what do you think?
Oh, I think you just nailed it. I really do. I had a friend early in the pandemic who I spoke to and he said, oh, the pandemic has been so great for our family. The kids are home from college. We're sheltering together. We're cooking together. We're cleaning together. We're taking turns. It sounded like the sound of music. And I thought to myself, my youngest daughter was a high school senior. Her senior year completely evaporated. No graduation, no prom, no formal end of childhood for everybody who graduated from high school or college, in not formal end of childhood for college seniors, but you graduated from something in 2020, it blew, right? And I was managing all this stuff and not going, I mean, not going anywhere, and everybody was baking and everybody was dyeing their own hair, and they were happy about it, or they were great, or what was it people were doing early in the pandemic? Seems so long ago. Some sort of fitness craze that, oh, best shape of my life. Are you kidding me? What? Yeah, it was just more pressure. One of the things I've been listening to both of you talk about, one thing, you mentioned it earlier when you were at the park when your girls were little, and those people who we have in our lives, the people, I live outside New York City, and typically I ride a bus or a train into the city for my work, and I have a bus buddy. I have not seen him for, maybe I see him, occasionally on the street, but those ties we have, they're called weak tie relationships. They may not seem like weak ties, but they bolster us. It's whether could be your yoga instructor, could be the bus driver, could be the crossing guard. All of those social interactions also give us dopamine and release brain chemicals that make us feel better. With those being absent, the only ties we have, and most of us are experiencing, are the ties we have that are our strong ties, that are our family members. That's fraying too. So I can understand why the drinking rate has increased so profoundly. And also, one thing that Dr. Mittal had mentioned, the burdens that are falling disproportionately on women. Let's not forget, 140,000 people lost their jobs or quit working in December, and the vast majority of those are women. I think there's just become a stop. There's a breaking point where women are saying, I can't do all this. It's physically, emotionally, mentally impossible.
Agreed. And I think, it's interesting when you take a look back at history and how, the stresses of motherhood were handled in the past. Dr. Mittal, you've mentioned that at one point, women were actually given tranquilizers called Mother's Little Helpers to deal with stress. And if you've watched The Queen's Gambit, you can see how, girl, that does not work out so well. So maybe not with the tranquilizers. But was that a symptom of the same problem we have today? This need to kind of blunt the stress of motherhood instead of addressing the underlying causes?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is an incredibly important point to think about, that, the way women are sort of socialized to not explicitly discuss their frustration, their anger, to often sort of present a sunny picture, and then to also get it all done all at the same time, and to do it as well as you can, or at least as well as looks good on Instagram or Facebook. That's a lot of pressure. And I think that finding ways to express our emotions through positive outlets is hard. We're not necessarily taught to do that. Be the nice girl, be the quiet girl, be sweet, and so I think that was socialized into women from a very early time. And psychiatry and medicine hasn't necessarily had great ways of doing that. Once they had medication that could help regulate emotion, I think that it was sort of misplaced in some ways with hindsight. But at the time, I think the goal was really to help people fulfill the roles that they were asked to fulfill. But squelching emotion is, I can tell you as a professional, is never a good thing. It often results in it leaking out some other way, in a less productive way.
You don't want 2020 and the beginning of 2021 leaking out when the world comes back to normal. We don't want any leaks when it's good again. Figure it out, people. So, Gabrielle, would you say that drinking is more socially acceptable than seeking therapy? Maybe that it can allow someone who's high functioning to, just kind of keep going and, blunt, as Dr. Mittal described. You can walk into a store and just, forego the prescription from the guy giving you the tranquilizer and just buy a bottle of wine.
That's a really great question. I think it depends on your cultural background. I think it depends on how, what your exposure has been to therapy, how well you accept it. But sure, it is economically, socially, legally acceptable It's also cheaper, you know, in the short run. If you don't have insurance that pays for a therapist, it's can be, you know, thousands and thousands of dollars out of pocket every year. And walking into the wine store and getting 6 bottles of wine that are going to last you for the next couple of weeks, that can be a really, and when I say economically, I mean short term, helpful in the short term. Obviously, over time, if you develop at-risk patterns, that's you're really going to need a therapist. But it's just mindful to think of what emotion you're feeling. I mean, and that's a crazy thing to say. I mean, it's helpful to think of what emotion you're feeling, what emotion the alcohol is going to either augment or squelch. And yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and I think it's important to note also that the alcohol itself affects women differently than it affects men. So that's, again, you know, another factor here. I want to put up a graphic for you that describes the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services recommendation that if you drink, you should do it moderately, up to 1 drink a day for women or 2 drinks for men. So Dr. Mittal, maybe you can describe, why is it 2 for men and only 1 for women? I mean, the patriarchy, we can't even earn dollar for dollar. Now you're telling me I can't have the same amount of alcohol. What is it? Is it something in the physiology of women?
So there's a lot of individual difference in the way alcohol is metabolized or sort of used up in the body, but there's also pretty significant biological differences between the sexes as well. Women tend to have different expression of the enzymes that break down alcohol, so we break it down a little bit less fast than men. Again, there's a range of variability. And then also we tend to, you know, our bodies have different compositions. Women tend to have slightly more body fat, slightly less muscle. And so the metabolism or excretion sort of using up the alcohol is slower. And so 1 drink can have a longer effect on a woman's body and then can kind of linger longer than for a man by general terms.
Okay, so now I got to ask this for all my pregnant and nursing moms out there watching. I know you probably get this question a lot, but tell us, give us the down low. What is the safest amount of alcohol, A, during pregnancy, and B, when nursing? And I must know, is pump and dump a legit approach? Does it work? Advise it? Don't advise it? What do you say?
Well, my strong belief about alcohol during pregnancy, and I know that there's a lot of variability in recommendations, but my strong belief based on the literature that I've reviewed and based on some of the known unknowns about the impact of alcohol is that I really do not recommend any alcohol use during pregnancy. During lactation is a different question, and I think that depends a bit on individual variability. One of the things that I see all the time is that people tend to get so worried about the timing of a drink, and then when do I pump or when do I nurse? And that in and of itself almost obviates the goal of having a drink or having the relaxation or having the leisure time. So my general recommendation is not to worry as much about pumping and dumping, because the time to peak amount of alcohol in your blood may actually vary person to person. So if you try to time it exactly, it might not work out, but really just to nurse or pump and then have a drink and then 1 drink until the next feeding. That's sort of a way to moderate alcohol. If you're able to feel the subjective effects of alcohol, then it's likely that the level is too high. So I think those are some basic rules, just trying to kind of think about how do you be moderate about it without driving yourself into a tizzy, just trying to follow the rules.
That's a good recommendation. Thank you for that. So Gabrielle, you have your finger on the pulse of the trends. So right now we are in January, the month everyone's talking about dry January. Is dry January something that can work to decrease harmful behavior, or is it just delaying February feeling lightly buzzed for the month? What do you say?
I do think that some of the research shows that it is actually helpful to reset your brain. You help reset psychologically any sort of habitual drinking that you may have gotten into. Certainly over the holidays, there's a lot of overindulgence personally, I would say, mid-November all the way through January 1st, but I think it really starts happening when the clocks turn back, when it gets darker earlier and people just feel more down and, oh, they look forward to a drink more. And it becomes, then the holidays ramp up. And before you know it, you're drinking. A lot of people are drinking daily and overindulging at parties. Obviously, that didn't happen this year because it was 2020. But I do believe that, I do know that some of the research has shown that it is helpful, at least in the short term. It helps liver enzymes if they've been taxed to kind of get back to normal if your liver's been working overtime to process all of the, who knows what, the rum punch that you're drinking, whatever drinks of people are drinking it at Christmas time. And I think psychologically it helps, the benefits can help show people that they sleep better, they're more productive in the evening, they might be able to read more, do something that is creative in a way that drinking and sort of half remembering the night is not.
Dr. Mittal, do you agree? Is dry Jan something you recommend for just everyone to consider?
Well, I think that it's trying to find the time that, whatever time it is, whether it's January or another time in the year, when can you try other strategies to try them on for size, essentially, other strategies to cope with stress. And I agree that physiologically it's good to reset and to try to think about or to observe how you feel when you're not drinking, especially around sleep. Sleep quality can be significantly changed by alcohol. Even one drink can alter sleep architecture, we call it. The effect on the liver, the effect on the GI tract. There's so many little small incremental issues that can come from chronic drinking. So it's certainly a worthwhile, anytime really. January is a great time to do it, but anytime someone chooses, I think it's a worthwhile time just to take a break and see how you feel.
Great advice. So let's talk about recovery. Gabrielle, you have somewhat of a controversial viewpoint on the AA program, and we're sharing some really interesting research that it's not the ideal recovery path for all people, especially not for women. Can you tell us a little bit about this point of view?
Yes, absolutely. AA is successful for the people for whom it's successful. And the people for whom it's successful typically are evangelists about it. And that's actually one of the 12 steps. The 12 steps is to help other people who are, I think it's the 12th step, to help other people who are suffering with their drinking and to, bring them into the program and to establish this faith and abstinence-based program that you remain a part of all of your life. It's a label that you take on. It's meetings that you are supposed to attend for as long as you need to, sometimes lifelong. And again, it's great for the people for whom it works, but it was developed in 1935 when our knowledge of the brain was truly in its infancy. And, doctors, this is, since we're talking about motherhood here, that in those years, babies used to, after they were born, they were, put upside down with their feet and spanked. We don't do that anymore. And medicine knows, Dr. Mittal can obviously speak a lot about this too, but medicine has evolved. We know a lot about the brain. We know what alcohol does to it. And there are many, many, many evidence-based ways that we can approach drinking when we get into trouble. One thing that you and I talked about the other day is that AA was developed by white men at a period in time when white men were at the top of the social pyramid. Alcohol was something over which the two founders of AA did not have dominion. They declared themselves powerless over alcohol. And I truly believe, of course, that can happen for a lot of people. But women, you don't need a degree in gender studies to say that women don't always have a lot of power over everything. So to go to a meeting and over and over and over again and say, I'm powerless over this substance is not something that I personally believe is particularly helpful to women who may be drinking for reasons that have nothing to do with their powerlessness over alcohol. One risk factor, many risk factors that women have for drinking are having anxiety, self-medicating anxiety, self-medicating depression, which alcohol is a depressant, so doesn't always work out so well. Past history of sexual abuse, past history of an eating disorder. Those are all things that are far more likely for women to experience and then to get into trouble with their drinking. One other point I wanted to make and that's something you can't talk about in AA. You're not supposed to talk about your past. You talk about the program. You're not necessarily working through your past traumas in an AA meeting where you have 3 minutes to speak. And another thing that I discovered, which was shocking to me at the time, is that AA can be a repository for sexual predators. And I think that's really important for people to understand. There's a euphemism that's called the 13th step. And it is, a phenomenon in which sponsors sort of glom onto attractive young new members and sexually abuse them or assault them. So it's important for people to know about that.
Wow. So Dr. Mittal, do you agree with the concept of, making sure that every individual is identifying the recovery path that works for them, and AA might not be a fit for everyone out there, especially women?
Absolutely. I think that people's path to recovery, to working within their own mental health and to defining what mental health looks like for them really does have to be carved out individually. And 12-step programs like AA can be useful, but in my experience, I see exactly what Gabrielle was just describing, that for those for whom it works, it's great, but there are a subset of people, a chunk of people for whom it does not work for them. And it is important not to push a component of treatment that isn't effective. And even for people who 12-step programs are helpful, it isn't necessarily the only thing that's helpful. There may be other components of treatment that are important: treating underlying mental health conditions, engaging in professionally led counseling. AA is mutual support, so it's peer support. But talking about traumas, talking about the past really is best done when you have professional support alongside. So having all of that together is really, really important. And also not to feel that there's a sort of one size fits all approach.
That's so interesting. And so I think as we think about alternatives and other unique paths to recovery, we're going to hear now from a woman who got sober, not through AA, through therapy, but she wrote a collection of essays about it. Christy Coulter is going to share some warning signs in her own life that signaled to her that she had a problem. Let's hear now from Christy.
Hi, my name is Christy Coulter, and I'm the author of the memoir and essays called Nothing Good Can Come From This. I guess one was that if I didn't have wine in the house, that was sort of a panic event. I had to go out and get it the way that you would have to go out and get something like milk for your children. I mean, it was just like this basic, you have to have it. I felt very safe when there was plenty of wine in the house. I felt sort of in danger when there wasn't. I wouldn't go to a restaurant that didn't have a liquor license. Like, I missed out on a lot of really good food because it just didn't occur to me. Like, why would you do that? I thought a lot during the day about having a drink when I got home, when things would go wrong during my day, even small things. I mean, it wasn't like my days were catastrophic regularly, but I would think, oh my God, I can't wait to have that glass of wine. And as things progressed, it got interesting because I would start each day saying that I wouldn't drink that night. And then at some point during the day, it would flip and I would think, okay, but just one. It was never going to be just one because I don't like having just one. If I can't have 3 or 4, I'm really not interested. So it became an internal war where I was thinking, no, you've got to stop this. And then that was sort of the angel on my shoulder. And then the devil would say, oh, no, just one, or just tonight. I think a big signal is if you are trying to moderate and you're repeatedly failing. If you're failing over and over at moderating, moderating is not supposed to be that hard. That's probably a signal that you have developed a real dependency. And at minimum, you probably, need some professional help with it.
So I think a lot of those examples are very relatable for folks. And for anyone out there who's watching who may be thinking, I do find myself doing some of those. What does getting help look like? What would you advise, Dr. Mittal, as a good first step if you think you perhaps do need to seek professional help?
I think the first place to start is with your healthcare provider. So if you've got a primary care doctor, if you've got an OBGYN, if you've got a therapist or a mental health person already in your life, I think it's really important to start there. Beyond that, there are lots of ways to engage in help. If something is really feeling acute or severe, there are emergency rooms, but there's also, each state has different sort of helplines. So for example, in Massachusetts, we have behavioral health access lines that we sort of distribute, and people can engage and just call on their own. And also for those for whom a 12-step program might be appealing, there's a sort of central services sort of repository of meetings. So in case that's an approach that feels like it might be useful.
That's great. And what about these mental health apps that are out there right now? Are those a thumbs up? Are we approving those? Is it legit?
I think it's really important to be thinking about the quality of it, because they're so pervasive, and we are in such a bottleneck in terms of accessing live mental health support, and also a pretty significant breadth of access given different insurance carriers and all of those things. I think that one of the things that is most important, or that we see time and time again in studies around psychotherapy in particular, is that almost like the type of psychotherapy matters a lot less than the relationship. And so being seen, being known by somebody is sort of the gold standard. So having a relationship is probably the sort of magic component of therapy. And so, the apps or the services that are bots, I am more skeptical about. The ones that have a real person on the other end that you might connect with through a virtual means or a telehealth platform, you can still develop relationships. I mean, I've sustained on relationships virtually for 10 months now. We can develop relationships through video platforms, even through telephone. But I think the ones where it's more automated, I'm a little more skeptical about.
Got it. Okay, that's a great piece of advice for anyone considering different forms of help. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about responsible use. And I think it's really interesting to note, we have a statistic here about sommeliers. So while we've just had this conversation about alcohol consumption rates that are on the rise for women, only 16% of master sommeliers in the Americas are women. And I don't want to say it's the patriarchy, but guess what? It is the patriarchy. Like many industries, the food and drink industry is very heavily male dominated. But even though the number of wine experts may be small, we have one with us tonight. We're going to hear now from certified sommelier Amy Karasavas about how moms can be shamed about the wines that they drink, and how actually learning about wine may slow down how much we drink. Let's hear from Amy.
Hi, my name is Amy Karasavas, and I am a certified sommelier. I feel like moms get shamed a lot too, because there's this narrative that the wine they're drinking is frivolous wine. And that's just simply not true. Like, people will tell you like, oh, rosé or like Sauvignon Blanc or Chardonnay, and they're not serious wines. And like, that just couldn't be further from the truth. When I first started drinking wine, for example, I was taught to evaluate it by sight and by smell and by taste, and to really think about each component of the wine and the aromas that were coming off of the wine. So that slowed me down. I had to really look at it. I had to just completely, it really is like, I keep saying the word immersive, but it really is an immersive experience. And that just does slow you down. And when you start to think about the bigger picture of wine, so thinking about pairing wine with food, then you also have to think about that. Okay, what exact cheese goes with this wine? What's going to bring out the best of the wine and the best of the food? You're just thinking on a different level about it. And it is kind of a calmer, kind of, slowed down experience where you're really taking pleasure in every single sip of the wine because you're constantly evaluating it.
I just feel that that's a very empowering way to look at it. And I think I personally need to learn more. But Gabrielle, when we spoke earlier, you mentioned something that I think may be a little bit connected to what Amy has to say about Italy and how Italy has, in fact, the highest wine consumption on the planet, but their statistic when it comes to harmful drinking and the associated effects of drinking is actually very low. Why do you think that is?
I think it has to do with the way Italians drink wine. Italians, Spanish, Portuguese, Greeks tend to drink wine. Italians, again, as you said, have the highest level of consumption in the world. The others are not far behind. And wine is a very, very social, communal thing. One would never come home from work in Italy. Well, I shouldn't say never, but come home from work and the first thing they would do was pour a glass of wine and then help the kids with their homework. That's just not how wine is drunk in Mediterranean countries that have a very, very, very long culturally integrated history with wine drinking. It's something that you enjoy. It's something that you savor. It's something that you pair. As Amy was saying, it's something that you think about. You open this bottle of wine for this. You open this bottle of wine for that. This is everyday wine. This is special occasion wine. And there is not only a ritual about it that is communal in nature, there is also, because it is so communal, there is also, there's no sneak drinking, there's no, there's not this sort of shameful stigma around, oh, am I drinking too much? I'm drinking alone. What, because it's just not done. I'm not saying that it's wrong to drink alone, but there is a very family oriented approach to alcohol consumption in Italy in particular, but also all Mediterranean countries.
And I imagine the lifestyle, the slower pace and more balance between the various facets of life, even though even in a pandemic that might be shifting, may come into play as well. So right now we have a few minutes left. We're going to take a couple questions from our live audience who are watching right now. Dr. Mittal, the first question is for you. We're talking about wine, but is one wine equal to one scotch, or is there a difference between what we drink?
It's a really important question, and it's something that it can vary quite a bit because it depends on whether you're talking about one wine or one wine. And so it's all about drink equivalence. So what we tend to use, and again, it varies a bit based on even alcohol content of a specific type of drink too, but 4 ounces or 4 to 5 ounces is approximately equivalent to a 12-ounce beer and a 1 ounce serving of liquor. So that tends to get you approximately 1 drink equivalent. The beer varies quite a bit. Wine can vary too. So you do have to still be mindful, but that's a guideline.
Thank you for that. Later, I'm going to ask you about tequila versus wine. Okay, so for Gabrielle, there's another question from the audience. I feel like since becoming a mom, I do drink more, but it's the one moment where I feel like an adult in my day. I don't feel like 2 drinks a night is too much, but am I lying to myself?
Well, there is a lot of variability among countries about this. The United States has one of the most conservative guideline recommendations for drinking on the planet. And 2 drinks a night, it depends on, are those glasses of wine like this? Are they Slurpees full of wine, or are they small cups? Is it a small glass? One recommendation that I tend to really think is fantastic, and I think it sort of builds in physiological, not becoming physiologically dependent, and it is taking 2 nights a week off. If you are a daily drinker, setting aside 2 nights a week to not have that consumption. And if you are really stressed out right now and a mom who really is looking forward to this wine every night, those 2 nights off a week are sort of dry January for in a short period of time. Those are the guidelines from Canada, by the way, and also Australia. There you go.
They're not going to brag, but you know what I'm
Okay.
saying over there. Okay.
Dr. Mittal, I don't know what you think about that, but I think those are really completely solid. There's a lot of science behind them and they make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me too. I would say that it's, again, just giving yourself the chance to see what happens if you try not to. If you try to take a day off and it's really, really hard, that suggests maybe let's see if we can find other strategies for managing some of the intense emotions.
So we are almost out of time, and I feel like I could sit and talk to you guys all night because literally you're the only people that are not related to me or, you know, my coworkers that I've had a chance to talk with in the new year. So thank you for that. Save me from hitting the bottle. We're almost out of time, but I want to also let you know that our next live event will be on February 9th, and it will take a look at how the pandemic has shaped screen time for kids. You can register now at scarymommy.com/liveworkthrive. So thank you to our incredible panelists, Dr. Leena Mittal. Thank you for joining us and for all you do to help women and mothers, especially during this pandemic. We could not have come this far without you and all of your colleagues in healthcare. So I really do want to thank you on behalf of all of us. Gabrielle, thank you for being here. Her new book will hit shelves next week. Do you want to hold it up for us, Gabrielle? Show us your new book. It is called American Baby, A Mother, a Child, and a Shadow, History of Adoption. Pick it up. Gabrielle is our badass investigative journalist. So you know she's got juicy tidbits in that book. So you want to get your hands on that one. Christy Coulter, to read more of her essays, pick up a copy of Nothing Good Can Come From This. It is available everywhere. And Amy Karasavas, if you think you might want to learn more about wine, you can follow her at That Poor Woman on Instagram. Pour is P-O-U-R, little double entendre for you. Her next wine class is on January 29th. So have a great night, Scary Mommies. Don't forget, tomorrow is Inauguration Day. Yes. Watch and chat along with Team Scary Mommy. We are going to be streaming it directly from Team Biden on twitch.tv/Scary Mommy. So you can follow along with us as we welcome in, hopefully, a new era. 2021 is not going to let up just yet. So let's lean on one another as we push through, because we are moms and we know how to live, work, and thrive. Good night, everyone.